Before we begin tonight, we'd like to take a moment to remember Don and Gail Patterson and Heather Wilkinson. We'd also like to send our thoughts to Ian Wilkinson. We're thinking of everyone touched by this awful tragedy.
All right, could you please state your full name and address for me?
Erin Trudy Patterson.
All right, Erin, I intend to interview you today in relation to the death of two people, being Gail Patterson and Heather Wilkinson. Before continuing, I must inform you that you do not have to say or do anything, but anything you say or do is being recorded and may be used in evidence in court.
Okay.
Do you understand that information?
Yeah.
Taken from the transcript. That's convicted triple murderer Erin Patterson being interviewed by a detective at Wonthaggi Police Station. Hello and welcome to this special edition of Spotlight. I'm Michael Usher. In a moment, more from the police interview room. Plus, the Australian man who unwittingly put Deathcap mushrooms on his spaghetti bolognese and survived. Just.
Last will and testament, farewell interview to my children. I was blacking out, that was it. Goner.
And a little later, the only other murder by mushroom investigation in the world.
There's a dead body laying in the ditch.
This can't be happening to me.
When we looked in his stomach, there was almost nothing except little chunks of what appeared to be mushrooms.
But first,
guilty of the murder of Don and Gail Patterson, guilty of the murder of Heather Wilkinson.
with Spotlight reporter Ashley Mullaney in Erin Patterson's hometown. And the world's most experienced minds are here to analyse all the evidence. We unlock the mind of a murderer.
People just don't become multiple murderers. Her appearance of being a typical person, a typical mother in a typical world, she's anything but that.
Forensic psychologist Dr. Peter Ashkar's window into the thoughts of the mushroom killer is as fascinating as it is horrific.
We're very used to men committing violent crimes because men commit about 90% of violent crimes. When a woman commits a violent crime, it's considered by, lay people to be especially aberrant.
Erin Patterson's psychological profile perhaps reveals the answer to the question we're all asking. Why did she choose to annihilate her adopted family?
Nowhere is that question more pointed than here in Leongatha, where this tragic saga unfolded.
It's some of Australia's most beautiful countryside. The towns of Leongatha and Korumburra, peaceful, tight communities. Or they were before Erin Patterson's inexplicable crime.
So what sort of mushrooms do you find out here?
Well, we just call them.
They're all mushrooms
Just
to you?
mushrooms, yeah.
And you think
I'll show you some over here,
they're all safe to eat?
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
So where would you find a deathcap mushroom then?
Well, but ask Erin.
Sid White was born and bred in this corner of Gippsland and a close friend of victims Don and Gail Patterson.
Can you paint a picture for me of what the town was like at the time?
Well, we're totally dismayed, What's happened here with all of this? How did it all happen?
It was a 17-minute drive from Don and Gail's home here to Leongatha, where Erin Patterson was busy preparing lunch that day. She lived on the outskirts of town and by all accounts she was an outsider with very few friends. Although she chose this country life, Erin Patterson was well-travelled, she was well-educated and she was well-off. She was tech-savvy, she was business-minded, but ultimately she put her eye for detail and planning to use in the most sinister way, in the kitchen just inside this home. Would you have ever imagined that something like this would happen in your quiet part of the world?
No one would imagine that. No.
Sid says Don and Gail, as well as Heather Wilkinson, were beloved in this small community.
You think about the sort of life that they would have had out here and what was taken from them. It's terribly sad, isn't it?
And the grandchildren and all that, all that's going to come for them, yeah. Yeah, it's really hard for the kids.
Yeah.
You think, mate, how are they going to live with all that?
It's just terribly sad, isn't it?
It is.
Speaking privately with the locals, beneath the silence that now reigns when it comes to Erin Patterson, we're able to build a picture of their most infamous resident.
For a place she called home, Erin was an enigma here. Locals in Korumburra tell me they rarely saw her in town, and when they did, she largely kept to herself. Now that she's under the microscope, we know a little more. Prosecutors say she was a woman with two faces. Publicly, she admired and adored her in-laws. Privately, she was growing bitter and resentful.
One minute she says she loves them and then she hates them and whatever. And she's told that many lies in court, you think.
What on earth would have driven her to do something like this?
I agree. Does she need some forensic mental job to untangle what's going on there? What were the occasions that set her off? Well, probably the divorce or the separation. They may be the things that she couldn't get through.
And in the shocked days after the fatal lunch, another bizarre clue to Erin Patterson's state of mind came to light.
So when you first walked in, what did you notice about that wall?
It was full of pen, crayon, textures, whatever they could find. They must have just kept drawing it over a period of time.
When local painter Matt Wrigley was sent to repaint a wall in a house owned by Patterson, he discovered it was scrawled with disturbing text and pictures. Erin said they were drawn by her young children.
I mean, kids scribble all over walls all the time. What was different about these drawings?
There was like tombstones and rest in peace grandma stood out to me. You're dead from my sword. And I just thought, well, that was a little bit freaky for a kid that age. So this is why we got a photo of this wall. And we were all looking at it, going, well, this is like not normal.
It's just creepy to look at, isn't it?
Well, it was actually sort of freaky to understand how a parent could let the kids do this in the main area of a house. This is where they cook and eat.
I watched her take questions, first from her barrister. She was stripped bare, vulnerable, at times self-loathing, talking in detail about her body image issues, her eating disorder, how her mother used to weigh her as a child. She then spoke about the traumatic birth of her son, who nearly died. And finally, she spoke about the breakdown of her marriage. All of this leading to one big question. Could any or all of these personal tragedies contribute to making a murderer?
They never did anything wrong to me, and I'm so devastated about what's happened.
Can you see anything in her childhood or her relationships that would suggest there were early warning signs here?
I thought it was noteworthy that her parents did not attend her wedding with Simon Patterson. This suggests to me that there's a problem in her primary relationship with her parents. So Erin Patterson, I suspect, has carried the insecure attachment that she feels for her parents or had felt for her parents during childhood into her adult interpersonal relationships. So when things go wrong in those adult interpersonal relationships, she responds with intense feelings of hurt, of pain, of injustice and anger. Now, I think her connection to Simon and his family throughout the course of her marriage provided her with a sense of belonging, perhaps stability, a sense of being valued, and possibly even a sense of being loved. Now, when that broke down, she started to break down psychologically. And I think that was the tipping point that triggered her thoughts of revenge and annihilation.
I'd like to understand why you had his parents and his uncle and auntie over for lunch on the 29th of July.
Because I've got no other family, so they're the only support I've got left. And they've always been really good to me. And I want to maintain those relationships with them, in spite of what's happened with Simon.
Yep, okay.
I love them a lot.
That was another lie. The loving face was what Erin Patterson wanted her adopted family to see, when at some stage she decided they had to die.
She very much operates as an island of her own. So she lost the what little social connection she had. She couldn't cope with that, and that was the beginning of the bubbling and boiling of her feelings of rage and anger and vengeance, and the planning of her crime.
What was the tipping point for Erin Patterson?
The eventual final breakdown of her relationship with Simon Patterson. People just don't become multiple murderers. You know, we know from Erin Patterson's personality type that she has very serious antisocial and criminal tendencies. And despite her appearance of being a typical person, a typical mother in a typical neighbourhood, in a typical world, she's anything but that.
All that remained were the invitations to lunch, which included Simon. But upsetting her meticulously laid plans, he declined.
Sorry, I feel too uncomfortable about coming to the lunch with you, Mum, Dad, Heather and Ian tomorrow. But I'm happy to talk about your health and implications of that at another time if you'd like to discuss this on the phone. Just let me know.
That's really disappointing. I've spent many hours this week preparing lunch for tomorrow, which has been exhausting in light of the issues I'm facing, and spent a small fortune on beef eye fillet to make beef Wellingtons because I wanted it to be a special meal. As I may not be able to host a lunch like this again for some time, it's important to me that you're all there tomorrow and that I can have the conversations that I need to have. I hope you'll change your mind. Your parents and Heather and Ian are coming at 12:30. I hope to see you there.
She's throwing a tantrum when he decides that he doesn't want to come. All of a sudden, it's just this angry outburst and trying to kind of just twist this emotional knife into him to try and get him to come, pull him into it.
We're talking about two couples, the victims, that were very nice people, you know, religious and, you know, big hearts, according to everybody. So she knew exactly how to play them.
Erin, can we just ask you a couple of questions?
It's sort of like she feels she's entitled and she's smarter than everybody else. She's playing the game and she's going to get them to come to lunch, and she's already planned what she's going to do. It shows she's a sociopath and a narcissist. And I believe that she'd still be sitting in jail in a year's time believing she was entitled to do this because these people made her feel crap.
I'm going thanks for asking. You guys aren't helping.
Up next, why this fancy food was almost the perfect murder weapon versus a blade or a gun. Explain that. How a trip to the tip put Erin Patterson in the frame.
She's picked the mushrooms and said, OK, well, these are going to rot before I get time to work out how I'm going to poison the family. Just astonishing.
Beggars belief.
Is just so chilling.
Plus, inside the only other mushroom investigation.
And when we looked in his stomach, there was these little chunks of what appeared to be mushrooms.
And later, this man put Deathcap mushrooms in his spaghetti bolognese. His extraordinary story coming up.
And I couldn't sit up anymore, I had to lie down. So I was basically saying my goodbyes.
The evidence that triple murderer Erin Patterson tried to lie her way out of centred on just how Deathcap mushrooms found their way into the beef Wellingtons. Police were rightly suspicious from the start.
Obviously, we've got concerns in relation to these mushrooms and where they've come from. Okay. Is that something you've done in the past? Foraging for mushrooms?
Never.
Or anything like that? Never?
Never.
Deathcaps are the deadliest mushrooms in the world, responsible for 90% of all mushroom poisoning deaths, almost all accidental.
When we look at the mushroom, the most toxin is stored in the cap. The main toxicity here inhibits in the liver the reproduction of liver cells. So you actually die of liver failure.
Establishing how many Deathcaps were in Erin Patterson's beef Wellington helped establish whether or not it was a deliberate act.
From the toxicity for Deathcap mushrooms, you would need about 2 to 1.5 whole caps to kill an adult person, depending on body weight. So if there is 4 people invited, plus I think there was expectancy that there are 6, you would have then actually to collect 12 full-grown mushrooms, where you then extract the caps to then have enough poison to kill these people.
But Deathcaps typically grow in much smaller numbers, strongly suggesting Patterson made multiple foraging trips.
If you would go mushroom foraging, in order to find 12 full-grown mushrooms, you would probably go a couple of times and would need to have a good knowledge of where to find it and be familiar with the area.
Police found extensive evidence of Patterson looking for information about Deathcap mushrooms.
So this is the iNaturalist website. On here, mushroom enthusiasts and citizen scientists can post sightings of mushrooms that they've come across.
Critically, we know she monitored the iNaturalist website, which regularly posted warnings from experts about where poisonous mushrooms had been spotted, including photos and locations.
And we know that Erin Patterson later accessed this website in autumn of 2023 to locate Deathcap mushrooms in the Loch and Outrim region.
Digital analysis tracked Erin Patterson's mobile phones by using pings from cell phone towers.
So there were 2 postings in autumn 2023 of Deathcap mushrooms in the Gippslands region, and both of those areas showed that she travelled to them based on her cell phone data, which was analysed by an expert in court.
And she was there for a good 20 minutes in each instance, with the phone not moving to any other cell site. So I think we can be very strong about the fact that she was in those locations.
You also pointed out a recipe book on the counter, and you referred me to page 250 odd, a recipe for beef Wellington, that you indicated was the recipe that you cooked, okay?
The beef Wellington has now become infamous. A complicated lunch to make, but an almost perfect hiding place when the weapon is poison. The psychology of using food as your murder weapon versus a blade or a gun.
Men will typically use violent means to exert their aggression.
Yeah.
When women kill, the most common method of killing is poison.
I don't care how much I dislike somebody. If I saw them put in poison that's going to kill them in a slow and horrible death into their mouths, I would stop it. I couldn't do that to my worst enemy. And she sat there, and then she prayed with them. And she said, "Oh, I could have cancer. Well, pray for me." The limits that she would go to are just astonishing.
To sit there and watch these people eat it in front of you, it's just cold-hearted and calculated. It's beggars belief how someone could do that.
Well, it's beyond my contemplation. I just think about the fact that they said grace, and she sat down and watched them use a knife and fork and place the food in the mouth, knowing she was murdering them is just so chilling.
It was clearly part of Erin Patterson's carefully planned crime that in the immediate aftermath of the lunch, she knew she had to pretend that she too had been poisoned to avoid suspicion. Caught on CCTV at a service station, Patterson told the jury she had to dispose of tissues after an emergency road stop because she had diarrhoea.
The day after the lunch, we know that Patterson decides, even though she's told her children that she's feeling sick with diarrhoea, has pulled out of going to church that morning. She still makes the decision to drive her son to a flying lesson in Tyre, which is quite a drive away. And on the drive, she's reportedly suffering from diarrhoea symptoms, but then the police have gathered this BP CCTV that shows her walking into the bathroom, going in there for a mere 9 seconds, coming out.
From there, it's on to the sandwich section, where Patterson spends about 40 seconds before making a selection. She then moves to what appears to be the lolly aisle, where she grabs another snack, later saying the food was for her children. But it was at Leongatha Hospital the next day, where she presented claiming the symptoms of poisoning, that her story really began to fall apart.
I said, look, I'm sorry, you've been kept waiting. The 2 critically unwell patients in urgent care at the moment, and why have you come to hospital? And she said, I think I've got gastro. And of course, I had a little shudder and said immediately, what's your name? And she said, Erin Patterson. I immediately said, Dandenong Hospital is concerned about Deathcap mushroom poisoning. Where did you get the mushrooms? I said directly, with my eyes focused on Erin's eyes, where did you get the mushrooms? And her answer, just as direct as my question, straight back at me, was Woolworths.
We've been told that on the 31st of July, so 2 days after the lunch, you went to the Leongatha Hospital, okay? And that you were only there for about 5 minutes and then you left. Can you explain why you went there for 5 minutes?
Yeah, because I just went there thinking I needed a couple of bags of saline because I was really dehydrated.
Okay.
And they said, we want to admit you and send you to Melbourne. And when you've got animals at home and children who have multiple after-school activities, you can't just be told to drop everything and you're off to Melbourne overnight. So I had to go home and feed the animals and pack my daughter's ballet bag.
Despite warnings from Chris Webster and these attempts by Dr. Veronica Foote, caught on CCTV, to get Patterson to stay at the hospital, she leaves.
Hello, what address do you need the police?
This is Dr. Chris Webster calling from Leongatha Hospital, and I have a concern regarding a patient that presented here earlier but has left the building and is potentially exposed to a fatal toxin from mushroom poisoning, and I've tried several times to get hold of her on her mobile phone.
So what's her name?
So the last name is Patterson, Patterson.
First name?
Erin, Erin.
I think where the police first would have started saying, hey, listen, there's something wrong here, would have been everything that went on at the hospital. Any reasonable person, if you've got relatives who ate the same meal and in ICU, comas and things like that, you would only stay 5 minutes at a hospital. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Now began a desperate attempt by Health Department officer Sally Ann Atkinson to track the source of the Deathcap mushrooms.
Hi, Erin. Sally from the Department of Health here. I need to know what type of shallots you purchased and if you could give me a basic description of the packaging of the mushrooms from the Asian grocer. That would be good.
Hi, Sally. Sure, I will try and get that information all to you as soon as possible. I'm just dealing with trying to manage and look after the kids in hospital here, and a bit snowed under trying to manage that. I'll get that info to you as soon as I can, but I've just been in a meeting with people in the hospital when you've been trying to call.
It was when I saw the text exchange that I became convinced that she had murdered them. Because if she'd been a decent person, she would have responded with utmost urgency to the health department who were trying to save other innocent people's lives. Instead, she fobbed them off with the most absurd excuses. As far as I'm concerned, at that time, she just looked like a psychopath.
Up next, tipped off. How this footage became vital evidence against Erin Patterson.
So it's kind of like she's picked the mushrooms and said, OK, well, these are going to rot before I get time to work out how I'm going to poison the family.
Plus, the other mushroom investigation.
And she became very irate when she spoke about that.
This can't be happening to me.
And later, this man ate Deathcap mushrooms and survived. His extraordinary story coming up.
Last will and testament, farewell interview to my children. That I was blacking out, that was it. Goner.
While medical authorities were on high alert, vainly trying to establish the source of the mushrooms, Erin Patterson was busy disposing of evidence. CCTV shows her dumping a food dehydrator at the tip 3 days after the lunch. There's also a credit card record for her purchase of a Sunbeam food dehydrator, bought not long after she first foraged for Deathcap mushrooms.
So it's kind of like she's picked the mushrooms and said, OK, well, these are going to rot before I get time to work out how I'm going to poison the family. So I need a dehydrator.
I think definitely it's pretty compelling that you go and you're in one place where Deathcap mushrooms are noted on that day, and then later that afternoon, after your phone has showed that you've travelled to that area, you're picking up a dehydrator.
Planning her crime, Patterson clearly knew that Deathcaps remain deadly when they are dried.
So the interesting fact about toxicity in Deathcap mushrooms is that by heating them, drying them, or manipulating them, they do not lose the toxicity. So cooking, dehydrating will not change the chemical component of the poison in the mushroom. You still will have the toxic effect and it can kill you.
Knowing what she'd done, Patterson told police that she'd directed them to scraps of the beef Wellington in her bins.
So when I went to the hospital and they said they were concerned that everyone ate some contaminated food, I said, well, there's the leftovers in the bin, you can have it. Feel free to look through it.
Perhaps she was confident police wouldn't find anything in the scraps she offered up, or in the bodies of those she'd poisoned.
From a laboratory perspective, there's a real challenge in finding these toxins, both in the leftovers and more so in the biological samples of the individuals, both the individuals that died and Ian, of course, who managed to survive.
Tests on blood and urine found Deathcap toxin in Don Patterson and Ian Wilkinson. No trace in the tests on Gail Patterson and Heather Wilkinson.
When we then test samples like blood and urine, unless we test within 12, 24 hours of the consumption, it may not be there because it's there at such low concentrations that the laboratory can't find it. So the absence of the toxin in this instance doesn't mean that the toxin wasn't ingested. It just means that the samples were collected at a point in time where the toxin had already passed through the person.
Erin Patterson claimed she ate the same beef Wellington as her guests.
Do you understand why we're asking these questions?
Yeah.
The other, conversely, we're trying to understand why you're not that ill.
I would expect all five, if they all ate the same meal, all 5 to have experienced quite significant toxicity. It's possible that the beef Wellington she consumed didn't have the toxin in it at all.
If her lack of symptoms was suspicious, what Patterson then did with one of her 4 mobile phones was damning. She wiped it 3 separate times, then a 4th time, remotely, after it had been seized by police.
One of the big moments I found was when she was recalling why she performed the factory resets on her phone in the police lockup. And she used the term, I just wanted to see if they were silly enough to leave it on. And I think for everyone listening to that, those words kind of just made your ears prick. Why would anyone want to see if police were silly enough to have left a phone on unless if they were trying to hide something from the police?
And I'm grieving too, and you guys don't have any respect for that.
I guess everybody who commits a crime must think, well, there is a reasonable chance I'm going to get away with this. But the prosecution was well prepared. Erin Patterson was not well prepared in committing the crime. She just left a trail of breadcrumbs for the investigators to follow.
One might argue that Erin Patterson perhaps was not so clever in committing this crime because she was caught. Others might argue that her plan was very premeditated, very carefully and meticulously planned, and to the point where she nearly did get away with it. Well, I think, Erin Patterson probably operates in a reality of her own. It's that because she is so socially disconnected from people in the world, she really operates in the Erin Patterson bubble. And so she has probably, at the time, given very little thought to how her actions might be perceived by the world.
But as Patterson's defence team saw the evidence building against her during the trial, they made the decision rarely ever made in a murder case, to put her on the witness stand.
That would have been a really very difficult decision because normally you would not do it. And there's a mindset amongst criminal lawyers not to do it. However, they ran a very astute defence, and I think that they would have said to her, just immediately before the decision was made, as things stand, you are going to lose. The impression that you create in the witness box is realistically your only chance.
Erin Patterson's performance in the court gave us a real insight into her character and personality. How would you characterise her time as a witness on the stand?
She is just a formidable witness on the witness stand. There's no question about it. She demonstrates such a presence of mind, attention to detail, sophistication and nuance of language, and makes it very difficult, I think, for a juror or anyone to believe that at any time she lacked the presence of mind that allowed her to make the catastrophic mistake of accidentally poisoning her victims. It just doesn't add up.
So her competency on the witness stand completely betrayed her narrative that she was innocent and just couldn't have done it.
Oh, absolutely.
Despite 8 days on the witness stand, in the end, 4 words from the jury sealed her fate.
Guilty, 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 guilty on all 4 charges.
Look, the first one was relief. The second was my hatred built up again for her because it is such a horrific crime, evil crime, and the fact that everyone was focused on her and nobody was focused on the victims, and we forget that.
When you're starting with 3 murders and 1 attempted murder, you're starting with life and trying to work out whether there is any conceivable basis of reducing it.
I think the thing that would surprise a lot of people watching this is that she's a mum. In all of this, did she not think that, number one, she's not only taking away the grandparents of her children, but she could lose her own children by being caught going to jail? No consciousness of the consequences for her children. That's something else, isn't it?
I think that's one of the most heinous aspects of the crime. Did she consider the consequences of her actions and the possibility that she might get caught and her children might be taken away from her? Probably not at the time, because people like Erin Patterson, they tend to act in the moment and not think through the consequences of their actions. You know, so the consequences would have been a distant thought if they were a thought in her mind at all.
Next.
911, what's the location of your emergency?
Over North Road, there's a dead body laying in the ditch.
The only other case in the world of murder by mushroom.
And when we looked in his stomach, there was almost nothing except these little chunks of what appeared to be mushrooms.
Plus, how this Australian man ate Deathcap mushrooms and lived to tell the tale.
You're just slowly getting weaker and then slowly drifting out of consciousness until, you know, tunnel vision and you can't see anymore.
The case of Erin Patterson would seem to be without precedent in the annals of crime. But we found a case in America with eerie parallels to Patterson's Beef Wellington plot. Indianapolis, Indiana. Home of America's premier car race, the Indy 500.
It's the world's largest attended single-day sporting event.
It's an unlikely setting for the only other case ever investigated of murder by mushrooms.
911, what's the location of your emergency?
Over North Road, there's a dead body laying in the ditch. It's a male, I'd say, I don't know, older, 30s, 40s, maybe 50s.
Friday, April 24, 2020. The half-naked body of a man is found lying in a ditch in Hamilton County, just outside the city.
He was found shirtless in a ditch with a pair of sweatpants on, no shoes or socks, no vehicles around, no identification. His pockets were turned inside out. There was no debris on his bottom of his feet, so he hadn't walked there. No signs of trauma, but it was obvious he had been dead for a few days.
Detective Greg Lockhart from the local sheriff's office was the lead investigator. Establishing the victim's name as computer specialist David Foots, Greg first questioned his wife, Katrina.
The last time I heard from him was on Tuesday.
You never know how people are going to react to the news that their loved one's dead. So we got some of the best details we could from her at that time. Her stories were all over that he wanted to commit suicide. He had attempted suicide in the past. And then she told us a story about him having cheated on her that previous year with the housekeeper. And she became very irate when she spoke about that.
This can't be happening to me. We were going to try to make this marriage work.
But Foots' cause of death was a mystery.
You know, we bagged the hands. We're going to take the clothes off. We're going to examine the clothes. We noticed remnants or residue of duct tape about his wrists and ankles. We examined him with a black light or an alternate light source, looking for any injection marks. We had no signs of any trauma about his body. So the next step is it's either going to be an overdose. You know, is it possible he had overdosed and someone dumped him there because they were afraid? Is it something he had eaten, or had he been poisoned? The next step was to take the stomach contents. And when we looked in his stomach, there was almost nothing except these little chunks of what appeared to be mushrooms. So we quickly found out a lot about mycology.
When other aspects of Katrina Foots' story began falling apart, Greg was certain she had killed her husband and that the murder weapon was mushrooms.
There's ones like the Deathcap mushroom or the angel of death, which by and large, unfortunately, if you eat that, you're probably going to succumb to that poison in that mushroom.
The mushroom identified in David Foots' stomach was not a Deathcap, but another potentially deadly species containing the toxin muscarine.
And that's what we found out was in his system.
But just as with Erin Patterson in Australia, proving it was another matter. There were Katrina's web searches for deadly mushrooms and no attempt to call her husband after the night of his death.
And the day he went missing, she never even tried to call him again, never sent him a text. And then we found that that night, or the night he came up missing on a Tuesday, she shut off her GPS services on her phone, which in the history of that device had never been done. It's a huge change of life pattern.
Greg faced many of the same challenges encountered by Victorian detectives.
We called several different labs to try to test for the toxin in samples of his liver, his urine, his blood. We're sending these pieces to these different labs. Well, what we quickly found out was for that muscarine, there was no test. Oh, by the way, after 72 hours, that toxin metabolizes out of the body regardless if you're alive or dead. So in the end, we didn't even have that as evidence. The mushrooms are in his stomach. Therefore, we know that mushroom has the toxin in it, but you can't test for the toxin because when we find him, he's been dead for more than 72 hours. So in the end, we don't even get a positive test for muscarine or the toxin in his system.
Despite all the circumstantial evidence, prosecutors in Hamilton County didn't have enough to definitively prove Katrina killed David Foots with mushrooms.
The toxin would have encumbered him, made him very easy to subdue. And whether the toxin is what ended up killing him or some form of a blood or vascular choke to his neck, it wouldn't have taken much with the way he would have been compromised. I think one of those two ways, there's only one person that's alive that truly knows at this point, and I don't think she's gonna tell me.
Katrina was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and is now serving a 34-year sentence. After the break, we meet the Australian man who ate Deathcap mushrooms and, incredibly, survived.
After about the 7th day, I was basically saying my goodbyes.
The man you're about to meet is lucky to be alive, really lucky. Simon Claringbold from Canberra unknowingly put 3 Deathcap mushrooms in his spaghetti bolognese. That decision almost proved fatal.
I was doing some gardening and it was fairly hot, and I can remember I was working pretty hard. Garden was a bit unkempt. And while I was gardening and raking up leaves, I found some pretty big mushrooms in the backyard, and they looked okay to me. So I picked them and put them in the kitchen and told my wife, hey, I'm going to have these on my dinner. My wife was looking at them and she said, we'll cut all these green bits off. So she cut away a lot of the mushrooms before I added them to my spaghetti bolognese. Thankfully, my wife or my 3 children didn't eat the mushrooms. I can remember how tasteless the mushrooms were. Like I expected them to actually give a bit of zing to the spaghetti bolognese, but they didn't. They taste like boiled tripe. That night I had was vomiting and had diarrhoea, and my wife said, I bet you it's those dodgy mushrooms you had yesterday. So I rang my doctor, and I was just feeling dehydrated and not that bad, but the doctor came around in the morning and took me straight to hospital. My liver was failing, and so when they were taking blood tests from pinpricks on my fingers, so the blood wasn't coagulating. So the risk with liver failure is you basically die from internal hemorrhaging. They'd basically correctly diagnosed I was mushroom poisoned. Deathcap mushrooms. I had that like 48 hours of knowing that I'm probably going to die. So that was like saying goodbye to people and children. So that was all pretty scary, as you can imagine, yeah. They didn't say you're going to die. I could deduce that I was going to die from the test results. And this is what the Leon Gather 4 would have gone through. And one survived. He turned the corner like I did. But I could have just been like the 3 people that died. You know, it's just complete luck. They would have passed out and not woken up. To think it was someone had put them through that experience, it's just shocking. The Royal Prince Alfred Hospital liver specialist called me a lucky man. I've randomly survived. It was random.
We thank Simon for sharing his story with us and thank you for your company. We'll be back with another edition of Spotlight next week. I'm Michael Usher. Good night.